A serious consideration for any of us recording our piano at home as a one-man or woman band is that we need solutions that are foolproof. When we record in the audio and there's nobody monitoring what's going on, it's difficult to know what result we're going to get, and quite often we'll end up with something substandard. However, one thing that really helps in this domain is what's called 32-bit flow, which I have spoken about before, but basically it's bulletproof recording technology for us. However, GarageBand, which I've used in the past to do all my audio editing when I make my videos, doesn't support the 32-bit flow file format. And so I needed another solution when I upgraded my recording equipment. And so today's video looks at how we can take advantage of this unclippable recording technology by using Cubase for our audio editing. Are you sitting comfortably? Then let's begin. So this video then continues my series on the Zoom F6, which is the audio recorder I bought when I upgraded my equipment. Now, I've linked all the other videos below for you, so if you like to, you can watch them later. So the starting point for this video is that I've recorded something using two microphones plugged into the F6, and I'm just going to download these onto my computer and work from there. So let's head now over to my computer and look at the editing process. The first thing, of course, we need to do is open Cubase. Now, this is a very sophisticated piece of software, even the LE Elements version, which is a cut down from the main one. So today I'll cover off just the features we need to use. From the home screen, we'll click on Create Empty to start a new project. However, just before we do, notice that you have a list of your recent projects just above that. And you'll find that helpful going forward. Cubase first asks us to specify the location and defaults to the Projects folder. So simply click Open and Cubase takes us to the main project screen. Out of interest, it hasn't yet even created an actual project. You can see the name is simply Untitled 1. So now is as good a time as any to click Save As and give the project a name. Before going any further, let's just take a moment to look at the main command bar at the top. We have the undo and redo commands. On the left and to the right, we have the window options. These affect the way your main workspace will look on this screen, allowing you to view the inspector, the editor, and the media. I'd recommend having just the editor and the inspector visible for now, as I have here. The final thing to look at for now is the grid control, which helps us place audio files more easily. Ensure that for now this is turned on, as it will help us importing the files. The first thing we need to do before we get started is to define the project in the project setup, particularly the record file format. To ensure everything works smoothly, select the correct sample rate and bit depth to match your recorded files, and you will have set these in your recording device, or if you didn't, it will have used its default settings, so you'll need to check what these were. For me, I record WAV files in 48 kHz and 32-bit float, and so this is what I'll set here. Note, ensure you check that the sample rate is the same as the audio settings on your computer. Next, we're ready to import our audio files, so ensure that the grid is on. All we need to do is drag and drop the files into the workspace and we're good to go. When I set up my equipment, I have one microphone pointing towards the bass strings of the piano and the other pointing towards the treble. I use a cable tie on my cable so I know which is my track 1, and it's from the microphone pointing towards the bass, and then track 2, the one pointing towards the treble. This is important because you want to decide whether you want the recording to give a pianist's ear effect or not, and I'll come back to this later. Now let's take a quick look at what we have here. Cubase has automatically created a track for each file we imported. So you can select the track by simply clicking on it, and the white highlight is the selected one. Each file is then represented by what are called events in Cubase, and these are placed on the overall timeline defined in seconds just here, unless of course we ask Cubase to use something else in the project setup. Now, before going any further, let's just make sure that each event starts right at 0 by selecting it and moving it to the left. Note that oddly, the selected event is shown in black. In the editor below, you can see the basic details about the file, sample rate, bit depth, etc. However, for today, we won't really use this editor except for visualizing the waveform. As these files were recorded in 32-bit float, the first thing we'll do is set them to the correct level. As I explained in a previous video, with 32-bit float, we're able to properly correct files that were recorded either too loudly or too softly without any loss in quality. There are a few ways we can do this, however, I found that using the Normalize process is the simplest and most reliable. As we do this, watch carefully what happens. I'll ensure the event on track 1 is selected and then Audio Process Normalize. As I've used this before, it remembers that last time I had the maximum peak level, which is similar to maximum loudness if you like, set to be -3 decibels. Anything above 0, so 0.5, etc., would be distorted. Anything below 0 will be fine. I've used -3 as it leaves a little room for adjustments afterwards. Now, as I close the process window, look at the waveform carefully. When I imported these files, they were barely visible, but now we have normalized them, they are much more obvious. We will, of course, want to do the same with track 2. Next, we want to get rid of any parts we don't want, and these can easily be trimmed away with the split tool. We simply select it and then split the file to remove the unwanted parts. Note that I've selected both tracks now so that I get my split exactly in the same place. When doing this, I recommend ensuring we have switched off the grid so that we have better control over where the split tool will make the split. Afterwards, we can simply delete these unwanted bits. We'll split in such a way that we leave a small overlap and then position the events accordingly so that they overlap on the track. We then take advantage of what's called a crossfade, which lowers the volume of the first segment while simultaneously raising the volume of the second, so that we can't hear the join. Again, notice that I had both tracks selected whilst doing this to ensure that everything is in exactly the same place. Now we could simply export the result, however, we might as well add some equalization and reverberation whilst we're here. So let's start with reverberation. As always, there are many ways to do this. However, I think the cleanest is to use what is known as an effects track. We simply click on the Add Track button and choose Effects from the pop-up window. This then changes the options below and we can select the effect we want. For reverb, as you can see, the option is RoomWorks SE. If you have the full version, you'll have lots of other reverb options, but as I said, the LE Elements is the cut-down version, so we only have RoomWorks SE. We can also give you a name here, let's call it Main Reverb. Cubase automatically opens up the RoomWorks SE plugin, and briefly, our plugin is a sort of mini program that represents what would in the past have been a physical box plugged into the workstation, and it's designed to do a specific job, so in this case to add reverberation. Fortunately for us, RoomWorks SE also provides a whole set of presets. And again, briefly, these are pre-configured values created by experienced engineers to represent certain spaces or effects. As you can see, we have a church and a cathedral, for example. The best one to use will really depend on the music you've recorded and the effect you want, and later we'll play with these a little more. However, before we do, we need to actually send some sound into the plugin for it to process it. And to do that, we're going to set up what are called sends. So let's click on track 1 first. As we now look in the inspector, we have an option of sends, and as we open it, we can select destination by clicking on the little down arrow. You'll see below I have the option to select our main reverb track that we just created. So let's do that. Note that you need to ensure it is activated by clicking the little on-off icon. And let's also set track 2 to send to the main reverb 2. Now let's open RoomWorks SE again and select the preset we want. I'll use Large Living Room. As we're doing this in an effects track, we will also set the mix to 100%. This basically means that this track will only output reverberation and nothing else from the original audio signal we send into it. Now we can change the window to what's known as the mix console or the mix console in project window. If you look carefully, we have 2 audio tracks plus our effects track, which are all being fed into the stereo out track that is created automatically for us. Basically, the output of stereo out creates the end result when we export it. There's also a stereo in default track that I've simply muted as we don't need it. What mixing means is that we're going to mix the recordings produced by each microphone together. We're also going to mix in reverberation with the sound from the microphones, and then we'll add equalization. Mixing can also include compression, which I won't cover in this video as I don't believe it's so applicable for solo piano. What I found when looking for videos on this is that pretty much everything is about how you mix piano with other instruments to make the piano sit in the mix, as they say. However, I didn't find much speaking about how to actually mix just a solo piano. So now let's look at that. By default, we have a set of faders for each track. We've also 3 small icons here that allow us to switch between different parts of the mixer, as this is a cut down view of it here. We have the faders, the inserts and the sends that we can choose between. Let's look first at what we can do with the faders view. You might imagine the fader changes the volume of any given track, and we can selectively alter the volume of each. More often than not, if we've correctly placed our microphones, then having the same volume set on each one should be fine. However, we might find that the bass seems to have picked up a little stronger than the treble, therefore we might choose to reduce the left microphone or increase the right microphone. Our first step here though will be to set the pan of each track. Pan simply means the side of the headphones through which we'll hear each track. If we have it 100% to the left, then we'll only hear through the left. If we have it 100% to the right, then we'll only hear through our right ear. A good starting point is to pan one 100% right and the other 100% left. To get a pianist's ear impression, I pan the microphone pointed towards the bass, hard left, and the one pointed towards the treble, hard right. Some people prefer to do the reverse, so by all means experiment for yourself. You might then try adjusting this to your taste. For example, setting both to be panned 80% and listen to the difference. There's really no right or wrong here, trust your ears. The next thing we'll want to do here is work on our reverberation track. If we select the main reverb first and then click on the inserts icon, we'll see that our Room SE shows here too. By selecting it, we open the pop-up window that we'll use to configure it. In general, I generally always use one of the presets and try to match depending on the music I want. For example, if I'm doing practice examples to include in one of my tutorial videos, then I tend to use a room type preset such as the large living room. For performance videos, I might choose something like the arena, cathedral or the church, depending on the music. Of course, we can always fine-tune the settings using the controls available, and you might want to try experimenting with this too. Now we've done this, if we go back to the fader view, we can adjust the volume of the reverberation so we get a nice effect. Often, you'll find that less is more. If the reverb volume is too high, it sounds very false. I try to get it to sound a little more natural by not having it too high. Next comes equalization. The most user-friendly way to look at this is to click Edit, Channel Settings of the Stereo Out channel, and in the window that pops up, we select the Equalizer tab. We use the stereo out track so that both our reverb and the audio from both microphones will be treated all at the same time. Cubase LE Elements has a 4-band equalizer. This basically gives us the ability to boost or to cut different frequencies. Essentially what we need to remember is that EQ will not add anything that wasn't already there. However, it can remove things we don't want or make things we do want more obvious. To understand this, we have 4 bands numbered 1 to 4, which are positioned left to right across the spectrum of sound. If we play our track and activate the EQ window, we have an analyzer that shows us the sound being fed into that equalizer. On the left are the lower frequencies and on the right the higher ones. So let's look at the basic controls. We have the ability to activate or deactivate each band. We can set the band type, which is the shape of equalization that we want to be applied. Bands 1 and 4 allow us to set different types of EQ bands, including pass, shelf, and parametric. The parametric bands produce an EQ that looks like a bell curve. The pass and shelf bands basically cut all or most of the sound on one side of the chosen frequency, not on both. Bands 2 and 3 simply give parametric options, so we'll apply equalization around a point. Next we have the gain. This is the amount by which we either want to cut, so lower the gain, or to boost, increase the gain, at the selected frequency. Next we have the frequency itself. Now the lowest note on a piano is around 27.5. And so anything below this is likely background noise and likely also inaudible to the human ear, but still contributes to the volume for the software. The highest note has a frequency of 4186 Hz. Finally, we have the Q value, where a setting of 0 gives us the most gentle of curves and a setting of 12 the steepest. Armed with this knowledge, we're now ready to start applying some EQ. When we let our track play, we have a graphical analyzer that shows the sound that's being fed into the equalizer. There's a thin blue line and also a shaded area. The thin line is the signal arriving in the equalizer, and the shaded area is what the equalizer is passing through, or outputting if you prefer. Now I can't really tell you which settings you need to apply, as this really does depend on the music you've recorded, the piano, the room, the microphones. However, a good starting point is to set the first band to a high pass and the fourth to a low pass, so we can cut off any frequencies at the very top and very bottom of the range. And ideally anyway, those are outside the range of the piano. We can then use bands 2 and 3 to boost or cut from the rest. As a demonstration, listen to what happens if I excessively boost everything around 100 Hz. Now let's see what happens when I excessively cut this same frequency range. The best thing to do is experiment for yourself. Try modifying the Q value to change the shape of the curve and lower or raise the gain across different frequencies. As for reverberation, less is generally more, as things can frequently start to sound strange. A final consideration is that of clipping. Now, whilst it's impossible to clip a 32-bit float file, our final output file will likely be in 24-bit, and this can clip. When we imported the original files, we normalized them down to -3 dB, which means that we can add 3 decibels to them without going above 0, the point at which we get distortion. As we add reverberation, we're effectively adding additional dB to our stereo out, so we need to ensure it doesn't cause distortion. Equally, as we add EQ, if we boost any frequencies, then we're adding dB, so we could go above the magic 0. Cubase luckily automatically alerts us to this by setting any clip channel to red. When this happens, we'll need to reduce the amount of sound being fed in or out. We might do this by lowering the gain of the stereo out channel so that it becomes less loud, or we could equally lower the gain of the main microphone channels so that less volume is being passed into our stereo out and reverberation channels. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. Once we've finished with all this, we're ready to export the rest into what's called an audio mixdown. This is basically a single file with the result of the stereo out channel, and that will be saved under the mixdown folder of your Cubase file system. We first tell Cubase which part of the project we want to mix down. Once we've done this, we use the File, Export, Audio Mixdown. Here we can set our file type, sample rate, bit depth, and the like. I always export at 48 kHz and 24-bit, such that the resulting file can be used pretty much in any other software, such as our video editing software. So there you go, a whistle-stop tour of how we go about audio editing in Cubase. Now, if you'd like to see how this compares to GarageBand, then I've linked the video here for you that you can watch later. If you're not already, please then do subscribe to Tommy's Piano Corner. Don't forget to click the little bell icon so you're notified of new videos as and when they're released. I thank you very much for watching today and look forward to seeing you very soon.